I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Bill Kaelin. Bill Kaelin is the Sidney Farber Professor of Medicine at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Harvard Medical School, and also a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator. He has numerous scientific accolades that I do not have time to list here today, but most notably, he was awarded the 2019 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for unraveling a molecular mechanism that explains how cells sense and adapt to varying levels of oxygen. These findings are leading to new therapeutics for a wide range of disorders, including cancer, cardiovascular disease, anemia, and macular degeneration. We are so fortunate to have had Bill's involvement in the leadership of Damon Runyon for nearly 20 years. He initially served as a member and then chair of the Damon Runyon Clinical Investigator Award Committee, and might have actually been on the committee that selected Rainier as an awardee. Bill joined our board of directors and was elected vice chair of scientific programs in 2016, and currently also serves as chair of the Physician Scientist Training Award Committee. We're so privileged to have his support as one of Damon Runyon's greatest advocates and a true champion for young scientists. I'm delighted to turn the podium over to Dr. Kaelin to share his insights and final remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Young, and thank all of you. I know your time is very valuable, so I want to thank you for being here. In years past, I would have said thank you for your support, and truth be told, of course, that was code for thank you for your generous financial support. I still include that, but I'm going to ask also for two more things, and that is your political support and, frankly, some morale support, because I think there's an elephant in the room issue, which is what's happening to science in the United States right now. I'm going to report to you from the trenches. Now, I know we all get news from different places, but this is the one thing I've lived and know about. So I'd like to share with you a few reflections. So the first is, I was really tempted to wear this Harvard bow tie in solidarity with my colleagues at Harvard Medical School, at Harvard University, who have had their grants summarily terminated, including many of my colleagues who work on cancer. Now, if you're wondering, so far the hospitals that are affiliated with Harvard have been spared, so knock on wood, I haven't been affected yet, but that could change tomorrow. I'm not going to wear the bow tie, however, for several reasons. I have three brothers who are all lawyers, and they assure me if you show up for jury selection wearing a bow tie, you will never be selected because no one trusts somebody who's wearing a bow tie. I hope I haven't offended too many people in the room. So I'm not going to wear the bow tie because I want you to listen to what I have to say. So I'm in the hypothesis business. I'm a scientist. I'm in the hypothesis business. So my first hypothesis is that no one in this room can remember a time where the United States did not lead the world in science and engineering. It's ingrained in all of us. We take it for granted. It has served us extremely well, economically, medically, militarily, and otherwise. It spawned these great innovation industries that are largely centered in the United States. Think about biotech, aerospace, et cetera, et cetera. So it might be hard for many of you to believe that this wasn't always true. In fact, 100 years ago, this was decidedly not true. 100 years ago, for example, Germany was so dominant that the de facto language of science and medicine and engineering was German. In fact, when I was attending public high school in Fairfield, Connecticut in the 70s, I was told, understandably, that if I wanted to go to medical school, I had to study German, which I did, not very well, by the way. And ironically, the disease I began to study, which eventually led to the Nobel Prize, was named after two clinicians, one German and one Swedish, who published in German-speaking journals, and these journals were widely read, and the disease was named after them. But you might be shocked to learn that an English clinician and geneticist had published effectively the same disease 10 years earlier in an English-speaking journal, but no one read it because it was in English. Why would you bother reading a journal in English if you were interested in science? So something really transformative happened, and I think we can point to what it was. So around the time of World War II, an MIT engineer named Vannevar Bush and I'm looking at Harold Varmus, he knows even more about this than I do, helped to oversee the United States research and development effort during World War II. And in the wake of World War II, having seen the important role that science and technology plays in, for example, warfare, he was able to convince the federal government to make massive investments in science. But he did it in a very sophisticated and wise way, and there were many contrarians at the time. He actually convinced the government that the best use of those dollars would be to invest in basic and fundamental research, because he understood full well this was the most valuable but also the most vulnerable part of research science, because you can't really predict when you're doing basic and fundamental research how long it's going to take you to discover something and whether the thing you discover is valuable or not for your particular business, for example. So most companies, despite what you might be reading, will never fill in this gap. They can't afford, they can't justify to their investors why they're investing in fundamental research if, for example, they make widgets or they make drugs or whatever it happens to be, because they don't really know where it's going to lead them. But over and over and over, this is where the really disruptive, transformative discoveries come that on occasion completely change our vision of the world, create new industries, cure diseases, et cetera, et cetera. So fortunately, Vannevar Bush prevailed, and he had the federal government pump prime and spend lots of money in fundamental and basic research. Now, again, this is again in the wake of World War II. So now we've lit the sign that the United States is open for business. If you want to do science, come to the United States. So we also were the beneficiary of the brain drain. We attracted the best and the brightest from around the world. Some of you might be surprised to know that whereas prior to World War II, we won almost no Nobel Prizes, since that time, we've won hundreds of Nobel Prizes, but frankly, a third of those people were not born in the United States. So the secret sauce was robust federal funding for research and being welcoming to the best and the brightest from around the world. Now, lastly, the nice thing is this became almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because this became the place in the world to do science, which meant we attracted the best and the brightest. We attracted a lot of capital, which then ensured that we were the best place to do science. And so the flywheel was going very effectively. So if you were ever to want to stop the flywheel, you'd have to do several terrible things simultaneously. So the first assault was the attempt by the current administration to lower what we call indirect cost from a neighborhood of 60% down to 15%. Now, this is a terrible term. It's often misunderstood. What is this? This was Vannevar Bush's vision that there's a lot of non-scientific costs that go into doing science, whether it's bricks and mortar, utilities, custodial services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that 60 cents on the dollar was meant to provide the infrastructure for doing the research, and he realized that would create a playing field where others, including philanthropic organizations, could come in and have their dollars go exclusively to do the science, because they weren't keeping the light bulbs on, et cetera, et cetera. So the first attack was, let's just capriciously lower and arbitrarily lower the indirect cost rate. Now, we could quibble whether it should be 60% or 57%, but these are real costs, and don't let people tell you otherwise. In fact, every research institution that I know, including mine, still loses money on research despite these subsidies from the federal government. The next thing you would start to do is arbitrarily start attacking some of the universities where this work takes place. It started with Columbia. It moved to Harvard. I'm told the University of California system is next. And by the way, not surprisingly, a lot of our Damon Runyon scientists are at these institutions. Then you would want to further demoralize science by proposing a budget which would slash the NIH budget by 40%. And the National Science Foundation budget by over 50%, and those are the numbers. So again, depending on where you get your news, these are the numbers. Now, thankfully, these numbers hopefully won't stand, but it's the messaging as well, because I can't tell you enough how bright young people hear every one of these messages. They can read the handwriting on the wall, and that sign that said we were open for business, for science, is at risk of being turned off. And then on top of it, you have this terrible messaging about immigration. Young people from around the world are questioning whether the United States is a safe place to work, a welcoming place to work, and whether science will still be done in the United States. Like many labs, I have about 12 scientists in my lab. Only 2 of them were born in the United States. And it broke my heart when one of my trainees, who's a young mother, said she's afraid to go to the supermarket to get diapers for her kids because she's afraid if she forgets her immigration papers, she's going to be picked up by ICE and arrested or fined. And believe me, all the trainees in Boston saw what happened at Tufts with this young student. And then the icing on the cake here is we've replaced expertise at the NIH and the CDC. You might have seen the headlines. We just sacked the entire CDC vaccine committee. We replaced the Board of Scientific Advisors at the NIH, which I served on many years ago, with one person of questionable qualifications. So they can see the madness. So we have to right the ship here. As I told you, we all take for granted that we've lived in a country that leads the world in science and engineering. I frankly don't want to live in a world where the United States doesn't lead in science and engineering. I don't want to live in a world where, for example, our adversaries have more sophisticated weapons than we could possibly defend ourselves against. And so my kids and grandchildren are now beholden to these other countries because we can't possibly defend ourselves. And with apologies to Howard Lutnick, I don't want to live in a world where the next great thing is invented outside of the United States and my grandchildren simply work in a factory assembling it. Okay, so this is not the world I ever thought I'd have to contemplate, but if we don't correct things, this is where we're going. So as I said, thank you for your financial support, but we actually need your political and moral support. For those of you who have political influence, please use it. Please engage with organizations that help to energize science-leaning voters. I work with one called the Environmental Voter Project. That's very, very effective. As was mentioned, organizations like the Damon Runyon are more important than ever in this time. And at the board yesterday, we thought about creative ways that with your help, we can help support our young scientists, because one of the consequences of all this madness is academic hiring has completely stopped. So through no fault of their own, all these brilliant young scientists who committed themselves to train, to work so hard, to be frankly underpaid, with a dream that one day they could run a lab, are being told, sorry, we're not open for business. So we have to figure out a way to support and engage these people, because we will lose them. This is a chain that's been unbroken now for decades, but we're at risk of breaking the chain, and then it will be very hard to get it back. So I can't tell you how important it is that right now you stand with us, support science, engage with the political community, talk to our neighbors who maybe aren't from the same political camp as we are, but explain to them that this is one thing we do share. Speaking of sharing, unfortunately, one thing I do share with young is I did lose my spouse as well to this disease. I lost my wife to glioblastoma in 2015. And I'm determined to make a difference in this disease. And one last thing, just to give you a sense of just how crazy things have gotten. I was on a phone call 2 days ago with a group of really brilliant young scientists at Harvard who have a very clever idea about making a more effective, and maybe even the first effective, true cancer vaccine. We were on the phone call for an hour, but literally half the call was, what can we rename this and call it other than vaccines, so that Mr. Kennedy doesn't flag this grant for non-funding, because God forbid we're doing a vaccine. So this is sort of this Alice in Wonderland world that we feel in science. So if you can help us, please help us. Thank you.